What changed when you turned 18?
More responsibilities and just feeling like you're not a kid anymore. You have things you have to pay for and things you have to take care of with the government, and fear of growing old.
Meet friends Marla, Milu and Clara, who recently reached the ripe old age of 18.
Well, very excited because I've been waiting to turn 18 for a very long time, of course. I could finally go out and get drinks and stuff like that. So it was very fun. I've been so excited and it's finally there. So
I was excited about being able to show my ID because now I can get in wherever I want.
Normally when you're 17 and you want to get a drink, you have to play dumb and oh no, I forgot my ID.
I forgot my ID and now I'm like, yeah,
that's true. I am actually 18.
Yeah, look at it. So I feel very proud when I'm buying cigarettes or drinks. I feel very mature, but...
Do you feel mature in any other ways?
Do we?
Yeah, I don't even know how to do the laundry, so how am I supposed to live by myself?
You're listening to CrowdScience from the BBC World Service. I'm Caroline Steele, and that was a little insight into how mature three teenagers from Mexico, England and the Netherlands feel now that they're 18. I should also say that CrowdScience does not condone underage drinking or smoking, and neither does Marla's dad, Richard, who also happens to be the producer of this show. Anyway, the reason Richard asked his daughter about entering adulthood is because of a question we're tackling in this episode, from listener Lynda.
Hi, so I'm Lynda. I'm currently living in the UK. I'm originally from Algeria. My question for CrowdScience is, I'm wondering why 18 years old is determined as the age of maturity.
This question has been on Lynda's mind for a while, because when she was 18, her maturity was really put to the test.
Yeah, I was at university in Algeria, and students used to strike for different reasons. And there is one day where there is a strike, but not all the students wanted to strike. Few of them, they want to attend the lectures. And there was a student from the committee. He came and he explained the reason why they are striking and everything. Actually, I was convinced by the explanation. So few students, they were also convinced, so they left the lecture. Few, they were not, so they stayed. And for me, I was convinced, but at the same time, I wanted to attend the lecture. So I think there are a few people like me, so we were standing there in the middle. And then the professor said, well, I'm fine with the people who left. I'm fine with the who stay here. I think the worst thing in the life is the people standing in the middle.
Oh, no.
And I was a good student, and I had a lot of respect to the professor, so I was so ashamed. I said, she always need to take a decision, and not taking a decision is very bad, is worse than making a bad decision. So it was the point that I decided in the future I will taking the decision for things.
Do you think that was a bit of a turning point? Did you become more decisive after that?
Yeah. So I think we need experience in life to be able to learn and making decision and mature. There is a cultural aspect, and this affects a lot the behavior of people. But I think no matter where we are, I think we have the same, we are humans, so same physiology. So I'm wondering if we are mentally and also physically mature at 18, especially the brain part of it.
Thanks, Lynda. To be honest, I think your lecturer was quite harsh there. That's a difficult decision to make, and I can think of countless times in my late teenage years where I made categorically the wrong choice. But was I doomed to get it wrong? Maybe our brains and bodies just aren't ready for good decision making at 18. And why is 18 the age of maturity in most countries anyway? Although, interestingly, in Algeria, where Lynda's from, it's actually 19. But regardless of the number, with reaching the age of maturity, you are legally considered an adult, which may come with the right to vote, get married, or buy alcohol, amongst others. But from a science point of view, is 18 really the start of adulthood?
Well, the age of maturity being set at 18, as it is in most countries, actually, that decision was made long before we knew anything about the development of the brain.
This is Sarah-Jayne Blakemore, Professor of Psychology and Cognitive Neuroscience at Cambridge University. She's an expert on how our brain develops with age. So I'm hoping she can tell us when our brains fully mature.
That is a really good question, and it sounds like a question that should have an obvious answer, but unfortunately it doesn't. It's a very complicated question because we don't really know what a fully mature brain looks like. There are two reasons for that. First of all, it's only really in the last 20 years that we have been able to look at the development of the living human brain using brain scanning technology like MRI. So we're only really quite recently learning about how the brain develops throughout childhood and adolescence and into early adulthood. And the second reason is that the adult brain is still changing. So our brains are plastic. That means they adapt to the environment, which allows us to learn new information and acquire new knowledge. There is no age limit to that neuroplasticity.
So if I showed you two brain scans, you wouldn't necessarily be able to say, you know, that's the brain of a 30-year-old and that's the brain of a 20-year-old.
I can tell you that that would be at the moment an impossible task for a human to do. So if you showed me, even though there is a difference on average, if you scan lots of people, there is a difference between a 20-year-old brain and a 30-year-old brain on average. Even as someone who scans the brain, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Now, that's not to say that at some point we won't be able to tell the difference, but at the moment that is not possible. That's partly because overall there is not much difference between a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old brain. For example, they're the same size, the same volume overall. In fact, the human brain becomes about adult size by about age 8 or 9 years. So by about 9 years, the brain is adult size, and it doesn't change its overall size or volume very much at all. What changes is the composition of the brain. For example, the amount of grey matter and the amount of white matter, which undergoes very substantial changes after age 9, right throughout adolescence and into early adulthood.
So there's not sort of, I don't know, something special that happens to your brain when you turn 18 and you're suddenly supposedly a complete adult. It's not like, that's the average age that your prefrontal cortex stops developing or something like that. There isn't a sort of neuroscience reason for 18 to be the age of maturity.
So the brain is still developing at 18 in the vast majority of young people. Their brains will still continue to develop in terms of the internal composition of white matter and grey matter, for example, right throughout the late teens and into the 20s. Interestingly, we've only known that the brain develops during adolescence and into early adulthood in the last 20 years. When I was an undergraduate 30 years ago, I was taught that the human brain stops developing in childhood. I remember being taught that, and I also kept my undergraduate textbooks, and that's exactly what they say. So interestingly, when the legal age of adulthood was set at 18 many, many decades ago, that was decades before we knew that the brain continues to develop after childhood. So it had that decision about the age of legal maturity had nothing to do with neuroscience. So now we do know about the development of the brain. What happens, does the neuroscience somehow follow the legal decision about the age of maturity? Not much. In terms of their prefrontal cortex, you mentioned, that's the part of the brain that is responsible for things like decision making and planning and stopping yourself doing something inappropriate or, for example, illegal. It's also involved in things like self-awareness and social cognition, understanding other people's minds. That region of the brain is one of the latest regions to mature, continues to develop right throughout the teens and the 20s, as do the cognitive functions that rely on the prefrontal cortex. So there's cognitive functions I just mentioned, like decision-making and planning and inhibition, self-regulation. They all continue to develop right throughout the teens and start to plateau into the 20s. So for most people, those abilities start to sort of become fully mature in the early 20s. But there's nothing special that happens at 18 in everyone's brain.
That's so interesting. If, part of our brain, which is responsible for good decision making, in most people hasn't fully developed until at least their 20s, it sort of feels like, how can we expect 18-year-olds to be making sensible decisions?
Well, by 18, most people's executive functions, that's the collective name for these cognitive processes like decision making and planning and inhibiting inappropriate responses. Most people's executive functions are doing pretty well in terms of how they perform on these tasks. So I think we can, for most people, expect them to be able to make good decisions by around 18. But the main point here is that there are very big individual differences in that. So some people's executive functions stop improving in the mid-teens, and other people's continue to develop until the mid-20s.
So maybe you feel like listener Lynda and me, and you don't, or won't feel mature at 18. Or you might have been making your best decisions at just 15. Our brains are all different, which makes it difficult to come up with laws linked to maturity. So perhaps it's unsurprising that different countries have drawn the line at different ages. And the cultural contrasts aren't just legal. There are also variations in the ages adult milestones tend to happen, like marrying or having children. In Algeria, where listener Lynda comes from, the average age of first marriage is 32. In some countries, like Liberia, it's as low as 21. And India sits somewhere in the middle at 28. Maybe the age we choose to do grown-up things could be a clue as to when and why we're really mature. To help me find out more, I'm joined by Chavi Sachdev. She's a Mumbai-based journalist and friend of CrowdScience. Hi, Chavi, welcome.
Hello, Caroline.
Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
So, when are people in India seen as mature enough to get married and have children?
So this is a difficult question to answer, but legally, like you were talking about with different countries, in India, until 1978, it used to be that girls could get married at 14 and boys at 18. And then less than 50 years ago, this was changed. Girls can get married at 18 now, and the boys have to be 21.
So what kind of age do people start feeling pressure to get married and or have children? I guess it must vary region to region, but are there any sort of patterns?
So I think traditionally there is a sense that you have certain stages of life and you have roles you need to perform. So when you finish studying, the next thing you need to do, if you're a boy, is get a job, become stable enough to support a family, and then start that family. For girls, you study, and then if you're from a family or a society that believes your role is really as a homemaker and the mother of society, so you need to have children, then off you go and start that phase of your life.
If I'm not being too nosy, have you felt these pressures?
So I am definitely an exception and an outlier, even in my own extended family. And
oh, really?
That's partly because my parents were exceptions. Back when I was in school, it was a thing that everybody in my classes was amazed at, that my parents had what we call a love marriage. It was not an arranged match. They chose each other. And my mother was over the hill compared with other people. She was in her 20s. She'd got an advanced degree and married my father, who was also...
I love how that's old.
Yeah, I don't know if she'd appreciate my telling everybody who's listening, but she was 25, and that, like, her chances were over. She was on the shelf, but she knew what she was doing. They also really espoused having a choice and finding your own life partner. So while my classmates were introduced to a lot of people, or their marriages were set up for them, I was exempt. But obviously that's just my experience, and as I've said, I'm an exception. I also spoke to Amrita, who grew up in a smaller, more conservative town, about her experience.
Hi, I'm Amrita. I'm almost 49 years old. I was 22 when I had my first child. I turned 20 right after I got married. 18, I think I was in school just about to give my board exams. And after that, I joined college. But I never did get to finish it because I got married when I was in my second year of college. So there was a lot of pressure on me to do the right thing, as it was called. So I did have a choice, but it was not much of a choice. You know, at 18, at even 19 or 20, I don't think I had the maturity or even the knowledge or the self-awareness to take any kind of decision. I don't know what, reservoirs of strength I tapped into to bring my kids up, but I think I was too immature, and I did not have the emotional strength to be a very level-headed mother. I don't think women should have children before they're 26 years old, at least. My daughter has just crossed 26, and I now feel that, yes, she's prepared for motherhood, for marriage, for a complex relationship.
It's interesting that Amrita says she sees her daughter being mature at 26. I'm 30 and I still think I'm nowhere near mature enough to have children. But I guess it really varies culture to culture.
I agree. And I also spoke to another woman, Manju, who's from a village 4 hours away from Mumbai, where I live. She had her first child even earlier, and her concerns were more about physical maturity.
17 tak rahegi.
So I was 17 when I had my first child. Do you look back and think that was the right age to have a child?
नहीं नहीं थी.
No, it wasn't.
नहीं थी क्योंकि वही 23-25 में रहती थी, ऐसे 24 में भी रहती तो भी ठीक था.
She said it would have been better if she was 23 or 24 when she'd had a child. Why? क्यों
मतलब अरे पूरा मतलब 17-18 में बच्चे करेंगे, उसमें शरीर में जान रहती है क्या?
Everything was hurting, her knees, her back, and there was a lot of pain and trouble.
उम्र में अपने को ताकत मिलेगी.
She says when you're older, like 23, 24, you finish growing, your bones are stronger, your body is stronger, and then you have the strength to chase after and run after your children. And when you're that young, at 16, 17, you don't have that.
You're listening to CrowdScience from the BBC World Service. I'm Caroline Steele, and in this episode we're looking into listener Lynda's question about when we become mature, and whether 18, the age of legal adulthood in most countries, has any scientific basis. We've just heard from Amrita and Manju in India about their experiences of becoming mothers for the first time at 22 and 17. Amrita didn't feel emotionally mature, which makes sense. We heard earlier from neuroscientist Sarah-Jayne that some people's brains aren't fully developed until well into their 20s. But what about our physical maturity?
It really depends which kind of maturation, even which kind of biological maturation.
This is Barry Bogin, leading biological anthropologist and author of a book called Patterns of Human Growth.
Well, my special interest is human physical growth, height, weight, muscle, fat, and also reproductive maturity. All those things are already going on before we're born. Fetuses are growing and even maturing in many ways. For instance, our sexual maturation stops just about at birth and doesn't even pick up again until puberty. On average, about age 9 is when it starts up again and really gets going at 10, 12 years of age. If we look at height, girls, young women are more or less finished growing in height by about 17 or 18. Young men are still growing in height until 22, 23, 24, even 25.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a little bit. Most of it is over, but for instance, I have a daughter who's going to be 20 in a few months. She stopped growing in height basically by 17. She has a boyfriend. Every time I see him, he's taller. And he's going to be 20, next birthday as well.
Why is it that it's later for men than women?
Boys and girls do have different patterns of physical growth and maturation. Boys actually become, we can say, fertile. They could produce fertile spermatozoa by about age 13 to 14. But those boys still look like little wimps. No older woman is going to really be interested in them Girls, however, look mature. They start to look like women years before they are fertile. And they have what we call secondary sexual development. The patterns of fatness, breasts, for instance, are already noticeable to everyone in the social group, but they're not fertile until about age 18. The age at first birth of women around the world and throughout history is about age 19. Now, I know some 12-year-olds give birth because there's a lot of variation in the rate at which that tempo of maturity plays out. But so few cases are recorded that, like the UK census, the United States census doesn't even include those numbers. There's so few of them.
Interesting. I think that's a really common misconception. I think generally people think once you start having a period, that means you're fertile.
Right.
But
no.
Turns out probably not for most people.
No.
So just because we start our periods at around 13, it doesn't necessarily mean we're reproductively mature. Women might not be fertile until about 18. But Amrita and Manju gave birth for the first time at 22 and 17 respectively, and both felt too young. Could we have evolved to reproduce before we're truly ready?
Yeah, that's a great question. We human beings are a complex and wondrous mix of biological and sociocultural factors. And you can't separate the two. Biologically, by 20, a woman should be ready to have a baby. And it's not a bad time to have a baby if you want one, because your body is more or less at its prime. But if you're not ready socially or culturally or economically, or have too many emotional concerns, then it could be a very bad time for you and even for the baby. Mothers who are worried pass on that worry through stress hormones, things like that, to their developing fetus and to their infants.
You might remember that our listener Lynda was interested in when we're mature physiologically speaking, culture aside. But as Barry just said, the two are inextricably entangled. And that's what led us to cultural anthropologist Bonnie Hewlett. When researching adolescence, she lived with the Arca hunter-gatherers in the Central African Republic. They're an egalitarian community. They believe that all people are equal regardless of age. So, does maturity look different in their culture?
So when a girl has her first period, she begins to learn more deeply these foundational key cultural values, and it's tied into this biological development. Once that begins, she is able to become independent, which is a highly regarded value, sacred value, this sense of autonomy within the family unit. But she can build her own hut. She can signal that she's ready to begin intimate relations with boys. In the Aka society, they have a fierce, almost sacred belief in the autonomy of the individual. So it's always the individual who chooses, when she wants to build her hut, when he wants to go on a hunt.
So could a girl have her first period and then decide, like, you know what, I'm not going to build my hut for a couple of years. I'm good as I am. I don't want things to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it may be that she signals to the boys that she's not interested, or she'll have multiple lovers, or she'll, it's absolutely individual choice.
That's interesting because, in so many other parts of the world, it's totally different. It's sort of decided, okay, at 16, you are ready to vote in some places, say. At 18, you're ready to drink and you're legally an adult and you're completely legally responsible for your decisions. It's not the person's decision about their own maturity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. By 10, the Aka children can fully take care of themselves. They can hunt, they can cook, they can make medicines to cure their illnesses. In these societies, in this development of identity and confidence, it begins in infancy. From the moment the child is born, there's respect for that child as an individual. Parents don't tell them no. They let them play with machetes. They let them learn how to play around fire. They're regarded as an independent person. that can make their own choices. This movement toward identity, toward confidence, toward maturity really is set in the time of birth.
Do you think we could benefit from perhaps having more choice in decisions around maturity?
Again, it's a cultural construct, but I think as we've seen with the ACA, there's different ways of becoming, and there's diversity in the experience of identity formation and the formation of maturity, whatever that is. And I think, if we had a better sense of individual growth and development rather than society-wide, this is what you are when you're 18 or what you should be, I don't think that's useful in some ways.
Perhaps there's something to be said for being able to navigate our own path to adulthood, because we're all different, biologically and culturally, and it's clear that the two are inseparable. ARCA children sound worlds more mature at 10 than I was at 18. Which made me wonder, does the environment you grow up in change your physiological maturity? What happens, say, if that environment is chaotic or unsupported? Do you grow up faster or just have to cope with more stuff with a less mature brain? Here's neuroscientist Sarah-Jayne Blakemore again.
That's a really good question, and both of those things are probably true. So first of all, we know that the developing brain, so the brain in childhood and adolescence, is particularly plastic and changeable, which means that childhood and adolescence is a sort of sensitive period of brain development whereby the brain is particularly susceptible to being molded and shaped by the environment it's growing up in. And if that environment can be positive, but it can also be negative, and that for sure will affect the brain, the way the brain develops. We know that from lots of animal research, but we also know it from recent research on the development of the human brain. But equally, the second suggestion is also right, that being exposed to different pressures at a young age means that you're having to cope with lots of different responsibilities when your brain isn't at a level of maturity that maybe it should be to cope with those pressures. And that will affect the way you develop.
So not only does our brain determine how we behave in our environment can actually shape our brain. Which reminds me of listener Lynda's defining experience as a young university student, trying and failing to decide between walking out of a lecture and striking or staying put and learning. I wondered what Sarah-Jayne made of this story.
It's not a simple decision. You have to be thinking about, the counterfactuals. You have to be thinking about the consequences of your actions. Also, the social consequences, what your peers will think about you. There may be pressure to follow them. What the lecturer will think about you. There may be negative repercussions of making that decision. Other kinds of future repercussions. It's not a simple decision for actually anyone to make at any age, but certainly at the age of 18. I mean, I think, most of us remember being 18 and would agree that we were not our fully mature selves at that age.
Lynda, I hope that helps you stop beating yourself up about your adolescent decision paralysis. But it makes sense that felt like a turning point. Because our brains are plastic, that moment itself could have contributed to your growing up. You wanted to know why 18 is the legal age of maturity. Well, the answer is slightly unsatisfying. It's because we decided it is. Science doesn't entirely back it up. There's no overnight transformation on your 18th birthday. Some of us might have reached full maturity by then, but many may still have a full decade to go. Ideally, we'd all have our own coming-of-age age, but that would make it kind of complicated to decide who can vote or run for president. Thanks so much for getting in touch, Lynda. Over to you for the credits.
That's all for this edition of CrowdScience. If you have a question you would like the team to look into, please email us at crowdscience@bbc.co.uk. This program was presented by Caroline Steele and produced by Richard Walker. Thanks for listening. Bye.